Okay, so hello, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining me. Before we got started in the lesson, my goal was for everybody to write out at least 1, 2, or 3 phrases that may be in their head right now, and then leave them there. We'll come back to them. We'll circle back to the end of the lesson. We had 2 exercises from the previous week that I wanted to go over. If you went through and did these, today's lesson is going to be super easy, like a cakewalk for you. If you haven't gotten to these, lessons 3 and 4 are in Academy resources for you to go over. And then we've got the self-discipline structure over here with the directions, the framework, and then affirmations. And then we've got the self-sabotage exercise, which I know some of you were saying you really wanted or needed. There's a lot of good stuff to get through in here. So tonight's lesson will have some growth task at the end, but it's not going to be anything too crazy. This week's lesson is focusing on reframing. Reframing is a tool that's used to change your mindset. Let me give this a second to load. Helps you change your mindset and change your perspective on things. If you aren't sure with what reframing means, hold on a second, we're getting a little buggy here. Sorry, y'all, I have my VPN on. I'm a girl. When do girls start trading? Since the beginning of time, my dude. Give this just another second. All right. So in last week's lesson in self-sabotage, I brought up the recipe for the longevity cake. And the 3 layers of the longevity cake are timing, direction, and risk management. Within each one of those layers of the cake is layers themselves, right? We want to be layering into our entries and layering out of our positions. We should never be getting all in or all out at the same time. So what I was wondering is if you have been following up with the longevity cake in your traits in the last week since we did our lesson. Have you been designing, baking, and delivering your longevity cake safely? Remember, we compared risk management to driving that cake to the wedding, making sure it doesn't fall apart. Have you done any journaling to work through the self-sabotage and bias exercises? I know I posted or showed you the last 2. We had the exercise with biases as well. The third thing I want to remind you before we get into this lesson is to make sure that you are treat yourself, rewarding yourself for implementing any of the growth tasks that have been shared in lessons or for implementing any self-discipline that you have been working on yourself. If you're forgetting to give yourself positive reinforcement, this is almost as bad as just repeating the bad behavior again. So it's super important that you're taking time to elect for yourself what is the positive reinforcement that you wanted, and then doing that for yourself. Extrinsic motivation is motivation outside of yourself. So if your version of positive reinforcement was buying yourself something nice you had been saving for, going on a vacation, taking yourself out to eat, whatever the case was for that, that's extrinsic, that's outside of yourself. Intrinsic motivation is motivation from within yourself. It's basically doing things for just the bragging rights to feel good. So sometimes when you start, you have to have the extrinsic and intrinsic motivation together in order to form habits. It's that positive reinforcement that's going to help you with habits. Last but not least, I just wanted to remind you that my DMs are open for anyone who is needing help with any of these exercises. I have had some people reach out to me, and it's been really quick and awesome to look through what you guys are processing as you go through these exercises and these lessons. If you want that accountability partner, I'm happy to be here for you. And if after what I shared today, you need some help with reframing, just hit me with a message sometime if you're in a bad headspace, and I'll be able to say 1 or 2 things if I'm available to help get you back on track. So give me a second. Julian, I want to help you, but I'm not really going to go through this like I did last week. So I'm sure Ahmad will help take care of that. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay, so before our lesson starts, you might have had a couple phrases written out. That's dope. We want to make sure that you had those. If you didn't have a chance to do so real quick. Some of my examples were, I'm not a good trader. This is too hard for me to learn. I don't know how to properly chart things. Whatever you're sensing or feeling in that regard, just jot a little something down. All right. Each lesson, I begin by telling you the purpose as well as a phrase that you can go into your trading session with to help hold yourself accountable. So the first week we worked on, do I control my thoughts or do my thoughts control me? Similarly with emotions, right? Next was, am I in control of my actions? Are my actions harmful or are they aligned with my long-term goals? Am I practicing self-discipline or self-sabotage? That's where that came from. Am I my own worst enemy or am I my own best coach? That's last week's lesson 4 on self-sabotage, where we talked about the difference between the voices in our inner critic and our inner coach. So this week's focus is, and this mantra that you can say to yourself when you go into a trading session, or if you're experiencing a period of emotional or psychological difficulty, is, how am I choosing to look at things? How am I choosing to look at things? So this week's lesson was titled Reframing. What is reframing? This is a psychological technique that consists of identifying and then changing the way situations, experiences, events, ideas, or emotions are viewed by us. So cognitive reframing is the process by which such situations or thoughts are challenged and then changed. Notice that this is a two-part sequence. We've got challenge and then change. This actually should have 3 parts. The first part is becoming aware of them, right? Sometimes we don't even know. If somebody asks you, well, what do you think? What do you feel? You might not even know. So your first step is to get in touch with yourself, right? Next is to challenge it if it's something that's unhealthy for you. And the third step is to change it. In the context of cognitive therapy, cognitive reframing is referred to as cognitive restructuring. So what we're doing here is we're tearing down those old foundations and building new ones. Much like if you think about this old viewfinder, like kaleidoscope things, filters on Snapchat, you have the same power over your thoughts and emotions. And we've been talking about it a lot, but I haven't given many concrete examples. So my goal this week is to physically give you numerous concrete examples so that you can then monitor and implement them yourself. I'm reminding you that you always have the ability to choose what you think of, how things affect you, and what you'll do with that information. You might not be able to control everything within your environment, but you always have the power to control what you think or feel about it. All right. So reframing, what is the lobster for, Julian? I think it was you who asked me about that at the beginning too. So the lobster is to tell you that reframing is essentially rebranding. So if you're familiar with lobster, when you go to a restaurant, it's usually one of the most expensive items on the menu. We view it as a delicacy. It's often sold at market price, right? But lobster is actually used to be referred to as the cockroach of the sea. The lobster was originally only fed to servants in your household or pets. It was not seen as edible for consumption by many people. And so once the train systems got up and running in America and there was infrastructure to deliver goods from one place to another, lobster was able to be shipped from the seaside places to inland places, where some genius marketer decided to rebrand lobster and share it as this amazing delicacy of a food. There's this thing that comes from the sea. You're going to die to try it. It's so good. So this lobster that used to be seen as incredibly worthless was branded as a poor person's food, right? Is now sold for $25 or $30 for just like a tail of it. So reframing, that's just to show you the power that perspective has when it comes to anything and everything in your life. And things can be reframed or rebranded all the time. Just because you imagine you existed in a time where lobster was viewed as a food, as dog food, right? And then if somebody said to you, do you think rich people will eat lobster one day? You'll be like, no, man, it's dog food. Somebody out there had the perspective to reframe it and decide, this, I can change this. And then it did happen. So that's the evidence here. Chat says, poor person's food. I'll stay poor then. Crawfish is best. I'm familiar with reframing. Delusion is a great tool. I usually use it to make myself feel better about myself. Jokes. All right, so perception is reality, right? We went over this in several previous lessons, but we're tying it back together here. So we don't see things as they are, we see things as we are. That's because things are coming from our perspective, and our perception is our reality. So your perception of the world around you is not necessarily the same as what is actually occurring. It's definitely not the same as what other people are thinking. This experience that you're having is biased. So this is not the truth. It is just a truth or your experience. You have power over your experience if you have control over your thoughts, because the flow of your thoughts becoming your perception and your perception becoming reality is within it, something you have control over, right? If you doubt these principles, here are a few examples for people who might think this sounds a little radical. Ask yourself, how is it that there are 7.2 billion people on this planet, yet we are all having incredibly different experiences, living different lives? There are people who live in the same town as you, people who went to the same school as you did, people who were raised by similar families, who ate the same foods, who played the same sports, who went to the same schools, who are all living very different lives than you. If you have siblings, if once you get older and you start to talk to your siblings about how they remember things from childhood, ask them and they will say completely different stories from yours, because even though you were literally experiencing all the same things, they have different perspectives, and their perspective was their reality, right? And then the other thing to think about here is psychological operations, or psyops. Think about how our thoughts are used to control people. If you don't choose to have control over your thoughts and choose to change your thinking, then you're told how to think by politics, by government things, by your debt you have in life. If you are buried in debt, you are in indentured servitude to Citigroup or Discover, American Express, Uncle Sam, Freddie Mae, Freddie Mac, whoever holds your mortgages, whatever is being held over your head. It's pretty much akin to indentured servitude. And when you have a debt in your life and things like that, it controls your reality. That's why you look at people who might not have debt or who have savings, or they say things like, or the popular thing that's being brought up in the media right now is, we all have the same 24 hours in a day. And people are getting mad. They're like, your 24 hours is different than mine, Karen. I have to work 3 jobs, when Karen was born with the silver spoon in their mouth, whatever the case is. I don't know. So different people, different perspectives equal different realities. So you don't have control over other people's perspectives, but you have control over yours. And I wanted to give you a fresh perspective, because before we all started to get into trading, right? You used to have to call somebody up on the phone, and then you would have to explain your trade to them. So I want to introduce this concept to you to have in your mind now as a trader, of the invisible broker. You can imagine him like a bouncer at a club, however you want to imagine this person, right? You can imagine Jordan Belfort from The Wolf of Wall Street. You can imagine this dude I have in the pictures here. But having a broker back in the day meant that before you called them, you had to have your asset that you wanted, your entry price, your limits. You had to have an entire plan and then communicate it to another person. And then when you did that, or if you were unsure, they could advise you whether or not you were being a total degenerate. You would have to imagine in the middle of the day calling up your broker and saying, hurry, buy 100 shares of GME for me. At what price would you like to buy these, sir? Any price, just get me in GME right now. All right. So if you would have been embarrassed to do that, you don't have an invisible broker checking yourself before you wreck yourself anymore. It's just you. You're able to submit it, whether you're drunk, whether you're crazy, whether you're just being a full-blown YOLO degen. You operate anonymously, right? So the reason I bring up this invisible broker is because there are some things that come from the whole perspective is reality aspect that are actually beneficial to you. Like, societal pressure isn't always bad. When society, what you hear a lot of people say is like, oh, I'm tired of being or doing what society wants me to do. But these roles often exist for a reason, because they help create structure, which creates order out of chaos. So when something comes with a role, it comes with the boundaries and expectations and a framework for you to know how to fit. So if you are not given a framework, you're not giving any standard operating procedures. You're just you're fully winging it. You either make those things for yourself or you don't. So if you are somebody who struggles with self-sabotage or self-regulation, or if you are just struggling with executing your trades, I want you to, or I encourage you to start imagining your invisible broker, who or whatever this looks like for you. Maybe it's the meanest teacher you ever had. Maybe it was your favorite coach. Like I showed you, I'm a Duke basketball fan. Maybe I'm going to make my invisible broker be Mike Krzyzewski for a while and imagine that I have to tell Mike Krzyzewski that I want a 0 date Amazon or that I want 100x OMG coin like at 2 a.m. and see what Mike Krzyzewski would say to me, right? Where are we at in the learning process? Before we got into these lessons, I told you that we have to go through diagnosing things like we would diagnose problems with the car so that we could go through and fix it. We've essentially done all of these steps now. All right. What we want to work on is how are we actually doing this? Why are we implementing to doing this? We're always going to wonder, why are we doing what we're doing? But now and today we want to focus on the how. So if our brains were cars, what we've done so far is we went through the diagnostic process, right? We've plugged in the machine, it told us what's wrong. We've replaced the parts. Now we want to test it. We want to take it for that test drive around the block to make sure that our replacement worked. All of these lessons we've been having on self-discipline and emotional control and avoiding self-sabotage and understanding where our patterns come from. What we want to do now is just, we figured out that other stuff, right? Now let's replace it and let's repeat it, repeat it, repeat it. Let's run drills to get it back into our head. If we're using our hero's journey, our trader's journey chart, like I shared with you at the beginning of our series, where are we at in our scale? We have gone through all the hardships of identifying our habits, our behaviors, our self-sabotaging things, and then we're understanding where they came from. Our revelation process was really last week, okay? Where we're at now is about this period where it says finally changes. When you start finally changing your habits, you start to forgive yourself for what you didn't know or what you didn't do before. So this is where we're at on our journey. So we're really close to the reward, guys, the gets gift process, and then doing this over again. You're really close to coming out the other side stronger than you were before. So I just wanted to always remind you, like I said at the beginning of the lesson, where I'm saying, don't forget to reward yourself. You might still think like you have a long way to go, but remember that we have come a long way already. Next, we're going to do some raw examples. We're just going to jump into it. I asked you at the beginning of the lesson to write down some things or thoughts that you had in your head. Perhaps they might have been negative thoughts. Perhaps they might have been protruding thoughts. Maybe they were self-sabotage based. Whatever the point was, I'm just going to throw a bunch of examples over here because what did I say in the last one? Repetition, repetition, repetition. I want you to see it done a lot so that then we can do it together and then you can do it yourself. So instead of saying or thinking, I suck at this, what else can you tell yourself? I am human, okay? Instead of saying I can't do blank, I don't know how to do this, I can't chart, I can't pick my entries. How about I am learning? Are you recognizing a pattern here? Instead of saying I'm a failure, you can say, I am brave enough to try new things. It can sound hard sometimes, guys, but this is that part of where we're trying new things in our hero's journey, right? We're coming out the other side. Why is this happening? Why is this happening to me? I lost all this money. I'm failing. I'm sucking. I'm awful. Why is all this happening to me? What is this teaching me? And these things that I'm saying to you, these skills that we're practicing, you can use them outside of trading, but this is going to be really happy. Stefan says, a belief is a thought you just keep on thinking, can change at any time. Yes. And saying, I'm sorry, I'm sorry I'm late instead. Thank you for your patience. Yes, absolutely. Bobby, absolutely. You can walk up to your boss and say, I made the most successful failure the other day instead of saying I made a mistake. Okay, so and not just applying these to your thoughts, you can actually look at some of your character traits about yourself. Think about some of the things or ways that people might describe you and understand that there's another perspective to be had there. So somebody might say that you're the same person who could say you're stubborn might also be able to see that you are committed to your goals. If you feel like somebody is clingy, you can just say they love company, right? If you think my girlfriend, she's demanding, I feel so happy my girlfriend has high standards. That's obviously why she chose me, right? Or if you say, I think that that person is rude. That person is a very blunt person, right? On anything anybody gives you anywhere, it's a coin. You can flip it and see the other side of it. Like, to say that also is that there's good and bad in everything. So what I'm doing in this lesson, I'm not trying to encourage toxic positivity, because that is a thing. There's too much of that. But what you need to do is, at least doing this helps you start to find the balance. That's what it's really doing. It's not replacing self-sabotage and toxic negativity with obnoxious positivity. It's just addressing the other side, because then it balances out the scales. So you can, if you're willing to do this for yourself, will you be willing to do this for others? For some people, it's easier to always do this for others instead of doing it for yourself. Some examples are, that person is idiotic, right? Maybe instead of feeling or thinking that way, you can correct yourself, reframe it, say, maybe they haven't learned about blank yet. Like, that person's idiotic. Why are they risking 5K on a one-to-one R&R trade? Maybe they don't understand, or maybe they haven't learned risk to reward ratios yet. Instead of saying or thinking that person is biased, you can celebrate that they are strong in their opinions by telling yourself that person chose a side, decided to trade, and went with it. Cool, right? Recognizing the good in some things. That person is wrong can become, that person is entitled to their opinion. Everybody loves freedom of speech, right? You wouldn't want somebody else to tell you what to think or feel. That person's call out was trash. How about, that person is brave enough to share their ideas in screenshotable format, right? People make call outs all the time. Having to make call outs is not easy, guys. It's you are putting your ideas, your trade plan, whatever it may be, out there. You understand as a trader who's taking that trade that it may or may not work out. But other people might have the perspective that, oh, because you have analyst by your name, because you say top trader, this is going to work out 100% of the time. Remember, due to our biases, we learned that's incorrect. Instead of thinking of a one-dimensional adjective to describe something, always remember that things are 2D, 3D. There's other sides to it. What I wanted to share with this whole, there's another side of the coin thing, is that there's something called the virtue continuum, which was designed by Aristotle, and Jim Langtot has created a book on this. And this is really talking or describing how you can find balance within characteristics of things. For example, if the golden mean here, or the balanced component, is courage, the flip side, or the extremes to that, would be cowardice and recklessness. Being too courageous or being or lacking too much courage are both difficult things. In trading, this is the side of sabotage. This is the side of euphoria. This is the side of arrogance, or the persona. This is the sign of anima, like we learned in Carl Jung from last week, all right? If you're looking at things like diligence, once you start becoming really passionate about trading, it's very careful to, it's very easy to fall into a bit of an obsession. And if you become obsessed with things and you work on it too much, workaholics are, the flip side of people being lazy. When you are, the important thing to understand as well is that when you sit in this camp, you tend to view other people in this camp, because you're holding yourself mentally as superior. If you're a workaholic, you're going to view anybody who's not being a workaholic as being lazy, or at the very least doing the bare minimum of diligence. If you are in a period of holding yourself like, I'm going to be the most honest person ever, you are overly self-righteous over here in the excess category. Whereas you're going to view other people as, or I'm doing this because there's so much corruption that exists over here. So those opposite and external behaviors, that's where you start. Before you can get balanced, you have to acknowledge both sides. It's a journey to meet things in the middle. Down here with judgment, especially, judgmentalism is in the excess of the deficit, which is foolishness. So discernment is what you're aiming for in the middle here. And what that means is, I'm not being too judgmental of people, but I'm not being foolish. This is an example of, like, I have boundaries for people. I have boundaries to prevent myself from being excessive in judging people too harshly, understanding I can only control what I want, versus foolishness. I have boundaries to make sure that I don't let my guard down too much so that people can trick me, play me, fool me, right? So that's the virtue continuum. So that's when I'm talking about toxic positivity, that would be excess. Toxic negativity would be deficit. We're always striving for the golden mean. This is why the first lesson brought up the wellness wheel and balance. We always want to have a balance. We don't need to be too much of anything. Before we get into some epic examples, I think you guys will get a laugh out of some of the things in the lesson today. I just want to reframe failure for you and explain why it is the most amazing thing ever. So failure is amazing because a thorn of experience is worth a field of warning. Failure is the best teacher. When you experience and go through things yourself, that is the number one and almost the only way that we truly, truly learn things. Other people can tell you, don't put all of your money in one trade. Don't put too many eggs in one basket. But until you go through it yourself, those things are just warnings. They're not true threats. The next thing is a smooth sea never made for a skillful sailor. If you want to learn how to be a sailor, going out on calm seas is not really going to teach you the ropes, right? If you think that skillful sailors, right, or smooth seas, if you think about that as being a trader, if you are not a skilled trader because you have only been trading paper money, because you've never had the emotions incorporated that and the psychological concepts that come along with the hardships and that you need to overcome to become a skillful trader. So one thing you have to do in order to recognize why failure is amazing as well is that you have to separate your self-esteem from your failures. Okay, your self-worth is not defined from your failures. If anything, failing means that you're a step above average because the average person only dreams of the things that they want, but never takes action because they're too afraid to fail. So wearing your failure as a badge of honor because it shows that you were bold and brave enough to take action is the way to go. Don't feel like your self-esteem or your self-worth is tied to your failures or your successes, because when you do that, then your failures and successes have powers over you. We usually overestimate the devastation that failure will cause. We think that if we fail, our life will be torn apart and we'll never be able to recover. But most of the time, that's just not true. Most failures are not fatal. Instead, they're minor setbacks. In our brain, our amygdala tells us fight or flight, right? And if you are not going to fight, then you are going to run away. When we're posed with threatening situations, we feel like we fail because fight and failing, fight or flight both pose risks of failure. If we run away, we're failing for not standing our ground. If we fight, we still have a chance to fail. That's why we fear failure so much. So if you understand that it's your brain, do the Ghetto Boys, my mind's playing tricks on me, right? So your life is not going to be torn apart if you fail. So understanding my biology is making me feel that way. Everything will be okay, even if I do. So reframing every failure as experience instead of a failure boosts our resilience, self-confidence, and long-term knowledge. When someone says they have 30 years of experience, they didn't have 30 years of success. They had 30 years of failure that taught them how to succeed and then succeed more efficiently. When people are looking for in jobs, they're like, we want a master's degree, we want 15 years of experience, blah, blah, blah. In that experience, it's not really, they didn't expect you to do everything perfectly. They want people who know how to solve problems. How do you know how to solve problems? By failing. All right, so in the Hall of Flame, we're gonna have some example time here. I did the Comedy Central roast of CT Image last week at the beginning of the self-sabotage lesson. Bring some marshmallows and some graham crackers because I'm gonna come for some more roasting so you guys can understand a little bit of the silliness behind the severity of how we frame things in our mind. So first up, I'm gonna roast this baby. Wah, 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 wah. All right, I give this little adorable toddler here 2.5 out of 5 stars, and that's a stretch because this baby really only has 2 stars going for it. One, I see he's pretty cute, right? Good looks and charm. It's pretty much all the man's got going for him. He's holding on to the wall here. He can't really stand up for himself. The other part here, we've got an expert crawler, folks, not really a good walker. I wouldn't rely on him to go on the distance. 2 out of 5 would not recommend this baby or rely on his walkability. What's the truth of this matter? The truth is that you learn to walk by learning to fail. Something every person has done in this room is learning how to walk. And you did this shit while you were a baby, before you could even calculate what failure meant for you. Why does anybody even want to learn to walk when we are all able to crawl? Why would anybody even have any interest in that? Because you can travel farther, faster. All right, so here's the average thing you did as a baby. Here was your first failure in life. All right, 12 to 19 month olds averaged 2,368 steps and fell 17 times per hour. All right, then novice walkers traveled farther faster than expert crawlers, but fall rates were comparable. So if the baby chose to stay an expert crawler and when some other baby, its twin, let's say, decided to be a novice, a noob walker, they're actually going to fall the same amount of times, 17 times. But the one that decided to walk is going to go further faster. So what it's saying here is the same shit is going to happen to you either way, but one is going to have an edge to it, and the one that's going to have more of an edge is the one that's more of a risk of failure, right? So suggesting that increased efficiency without increased cost motivates expert crawlers to transition to walking. Next, you've got after walking onset, natural locomotion dramatically improves. Okay, so once that novice walker decided to start walking, infants took more steps, traveled farther distances, and fell less. So what's the only thing here that's different? Practice. So you're already have an edge just by trying here. You went further, you fell the same amount of times as the crawling baby. Now you're taking more steps, going further distances and falling less. Now you're far ahead of the baby that chose to remain an expert crawler its life. Walking was distributed in short bouts with varial paths, frequently too short or irregular to qualify as periodic gait. Nonetheless, measures of periodic gait and natural locomotion were correlated, indicating that better walkers spontaneously walk more and fall less. What this means is that no matter how crazy the walking gets, whether they're in weird patterns like varial paths or they still bump into shit, they're actually going to be more likely to walk in other areas of life. Spontaneity. What is this a sign of? Confidence. The opposite of all this fear and other things is confidence. And you gain that by facing your fears. If you're a Stoic, or a Taoist, the phrase is the obstacle is the way. Once you overcome or go through the obstacle, you feel a little more fearless. So time and practice will get you to that 5-star outcome. Next up, I've got this homie on the right. Take a picture of this dude and look at this guy while I tell you a little bit more about this nerd over here. So this dude grew up on a farm and he was illiterate. All right. When he became like teenage age, he bought a plot of land the size of Connecticut in the middle of the jungle. I want to say it was Costa Rica, and tried to turn it into his own business centered utopia. He wanted to live there. He wanted to be mayor. He's like, here's my special town in the middle of the jungle woods. I put in here Starbase much because it's a little Elon to me. This guy over here in this picture on the right, once his little Costa Rican jungle town failed, he came back. He was living in Chicago and he wound up suing the local Chicago paper, which is called the Chicago Tribune, if you're unfamiliar. He sued them for $1 million when they labeled him an ignorant idealist and an anarchist after his Costa Rican ventures in the jungle and all this other shit. When he sued them for $1 million, what they wound up settling for, the Tribune, they didn't take back their words and their slander. Instead, they settled for 6 cents. This guy wasted his time, tried to get $1 million for them saying all this crap about him, and they paid the guy 6 cents. Big insult, right? So he's got one under his belt. He's like, you know what? The papers can say whatever about me. I'm just going to stand up for myself no matter what. Let me run for Senate. So the guy decides to run for Senate, but then he falls short of winning the Senate because he refused to spend a single dime on his campaign. He's like, I'm going to do it with no money, just people skills. He had it's like having a trade plan and not executing it here. Other people can see, man, if you just spent a little money, you would have won. Isn't that worth it to you? Not if that's what his plan wasn't. And his plan was to not spend a single dime. He fell short, but by such a small margin, only 4,500 votes. This dude was also a cheating husband, rampant husband, I think had a full-on double life and was an incredible deadbeat dad. So this guy is famous. His famous quote, and something that's really relevant for our reframing lesson, is whether you think you can or you can't, you're right. Drop in the chat if you know this guy's name before I expose him. Some more roasting. We're roasting babies. We're roasting legends. Nobody knows. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Henry Ford, president, CEO, owner of Ford Motor Company. This guy who grew up on a farm and couldn't read, this guy who was a deadbeat dad and cheating husband, was Henry motherfucking Ford. So how would we reframe him then? Well, he was kind of a shitty husband, not that smart of a guy, but he made us a car. How did he make a car? Because he was stubborn. He did not give up. He thought he could. Whether you think you can or you can't, you're right. All right? Henry Ford, ladies and gentlemen. When they took him to court after the Chicago Tribune's shit, they tried to intimidate him because they knew he was not an intelligent person. He was not well spoken. And they said, how can you even try and have a successful business when you don't even know how to read a sentence, blah, 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 blah. He's like, I don't have to know what any of that shit means. I just have to have enough money to pay people who can understand it for me. And that sounds a little capitalist AF, but did he get his end goal? Yeah. So here's another way of reframing things. When I'm giving you guys examples of failures and successes, I could talk to you about Martin Luther King. We know him as I Have a Dream, but he was this chronic cheater as well. You know, people are not all full, all good, all in excess, or all in deficit, right? You could be being a stubborn degen, that'd be death. Refusing to give up your crazy ambitions, winding up inventing a fucking car, right? Here's some other examples for you. My main man, Thomas Edison. Edison's teachers said he was going to be unsuccessful. He was fired at his first several jobs for being unproductive. Then, in order to get his first invention off the ground, he failed 1,000 times. It took 1,000 tries. His way of reframing this for himself was, I didn't fail. I just found 10,000 ways that don't work. The guy's a legend. You're really going to fail 1,000 times and still keep on going? He was quoted as also saying, I didn't fail 1,000 times. The invention just had 1,000 steps. Anytime a reporter asked him, how did you do it? How did you keep going? How did you fail? He would take offense. He would be like, bro, I didn't fail. Come at me again. All right. He would just say logical things like, well, I eliminated all the ways that didn't work and I found the one that did. How many inventions did this guy wind up having? 1,093. Our movie theaters, our telephones, our light bulbs, all of these things are due to this one guy. The first time, if he hadn't gone through those 1,000 bits of failures to get the light bulb and have that win under his belt that gave him confidence, he wouldn't have kept going. But because he did, and because he chose to view it as not as a failure, but as a lesson and a learning experience, he wound up finding a rhythm, finding a groove. He did a bunch of other shit too. He blew up a few of his labs, lost a lot of money, but at the end of the day, very successful life as an investor. Other things people said about other people or other hardships, and they reframed it. Disney was fired in Kansas City. He had his little business he tried to start for himself went under. Allegedly, he ate dog food to survive. He couldn't pay his rent. And when he was fired, he was told that he lacked imagination and had no good ideas. So you have to understand that people who came up against other people telling them what to think or feel about themselves, at the end of the day, the only reason they succeeded is because they reframed their failures in their mind. Michael Jordan is a classic example of this because he's considered the GOAT when he didn't even make his high school basketball team. Abraham Lincoln is the only, I mean, like not the only, I can't say that for sure, but when he left to fight in the war, he left as a captain and came back as a private. He got demoted. And then the guy obviously went on to become president. He was a very successful lawyer. His great concern is not whether you have failed, but whether you are content with your failure. He learned to come to terms with his failure because he understand, instead of saying, why is this happening to me? He says, what did I learn from this? Right? J.K. Rowling, controversial author, was also living on a welfare life. She was rejected from every publisher she sent Harry Potter to, and then only one accepted it and only paid her £1,500 for it. Look how that wound up. Sanders, not Barry Sanders here, my main man, Colonel Sanders, at age 62, had $105 left to his name thanks to a social security check he luckily got in the mail. In coincidental enough time for him to try and pitch his famous fried chicken. He pitched it to 1,000 restaurants. All of them denied him until obviously 1001 decided to say yes. And now KFC, believe it or not, is one of the largest international restaurants. From $105, this guy made it. At 62, never give up on your dreams, people. Last one is Sir James Dyson. Sir James Dyson failed 5,000 times over 15 years. And then my favorite invention ever, the Dyson vacuum. One of his prototypes finally freaking worked, dude. Finally worked. Dysons have not been around that long. That's why I included this example. You can remember a time before Dyson. The whole time you were born and raised before Dyson, this dude was failing. He didn't give up. Now Dyson is like a 4.5 billion company, and I can't even imagine how much money this guy has. So admitting failure helps you. Acknowledging your failure helps you. Reframing your failure helps you. Another good thing that you can do to transform your failure is to teach others the lessons that failure has taught you, because this brings purpose to your failure. Instead of feeling like I failed, you can say, I discovered something that I can share with the intention of protecting others. Of course, not everybody will listen to your warnings, right? We know experience is the best thing, but if you can teach things, then you have brought purpose to your failure. If you keep moving forward, failures often become the best war stories. Chicks dig scars, sort of a mentality. Like, where'd you get that scar? Oh, this guy never gives up. He failed 1,000 times and then invented the freaking light bulb, blah, 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 right? The other thing is to recognize that, like, stop giving failure or the feelings of failure its power, because failure here, let me go back here. If failure equals not achieving the desired outcome, then so much in your life is at a possibility for failure. That's literally a 50-50 probability. Anything you approach in your life, if you're viewing it as not getting what I want, it's a 50-50 chance. You get what you want or you don't. You get your desired outcome or you don't. So you're choosing, even though it's a 50-50 probability in your head, when you're consumed with failure, you're giving it like an 80-20%, 80-20 chance of probability, or 70-30 if you're letting failure overwhelm and overpower your other frameworks, right? And that's not leaving things within your control. That's letting your lizard part of your brain, the oldest part of your body, take control of you. We're more advanced than that. So in the following slides, I actually have screenshots I've gotten from our Discord servers that are all examples. I've blocked out everybody's name, hopefully. I'm pretty sure I did this, but anything that is shared here is not shared by me. It might have been even shared by some of you. So some comments included here: how admitting failure helps you, or how failure and things you can reframe it, see why and what creates the setup rather than blindly follow. People here will want to help you get better. There's also part of getting better at something is being bad at something first. So it's really great to see some of these good examples by other people in the server. Some ways to reframe: you're getting stopped out if you find yourself getting emotionally or psychologically caught up in that. You can tell yourself, awesome, protect my capital. A new trade opportunity is here, because if your stop is at the invalidation of a trade, then once it hits, that means there's a new trade option available. You're living to see another day. You made it through, right? Profit is profit. And I didn't lose as much as I could have, right? There's always going to be some positive aspect to that. There are some people who comment, I'm not the best at using mental stop losses yet. Some people are really challenging themselves with their self-discipline and their self-sabotage and exploring their boundaries here. That's a good thing. When you're getting better at the discipline aspect of that, that will help you define and explore and expand your boundaries. Some other comments that you'll see sometimes: there's nobody who can help you but yourself. At the end of the day, there is no other help other than self-help. So when you're identifying your thought processes about things, here's an example here from someone was, I don't know why I opened a trade. I really couldn't be bothered to see it through. Like, when you start learning and listening to your thoughts on these things, you're going to learn that sometimes there's not really an easy reframe for it. But what you're going to be able to do is start to identify your behavior behind this, like not being able to see a trade through. It's laziness, right? So if you can't identify what behavior is associated with it on the virtue continuum, or if you can, then you can help to identify the opposites to help yourself get balanced out. You can also reach out to others to help get their perspective, right? One thing you see in the server a lot that you can learn to flip the script on is FOMO, the fear of missing out. So there are some people, you'll see people a lot, oh, I missed the opportunity to long. I was going to, but I was doing something else, bro. I was at work. I missed the long entry. Oh, if I didn't have to pick up my kids from school, blah, 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 missed opportunities. The fear of missing opportunities is not something that you should feel. And when you express that, a more healthy peer would help you understand you don't have to FOMO. There's going to be other plays to come. Missed opportunities better than gut-wrenching drop after drop after drop. Like, hey, that play that you were worried about FOMOing into that you feel like you missed out on, it actually wound up being a loser. You saved yourself some trouble. Then you've got be careful of the fake pump. Don't FOMO into it. So there's some people who can actually help you in this regard. So being able to flip the script is something that maybe you don't even need to worry about doing for yourself. If you're one of those people who struggles with people pleasing, you might find it easier to do for others first. If you're working on your self-discipline, you should be able to do this for yourself first. But if you're stuck in an emotional or psychological rut, you can DM me or put it in the server, and chances are somebody will reach out to you to help you flip the script. Sometimes people will not be so kind on Discord. Remember, we have to be honest about the virtue continuum and that there's always going to be other sides here. So regardless of what or how people express themselves in this area, understand that people's voices are just reflections of how they talk to themselves. So if they're talking shit to you, that's because they're rude as hell to themselves. If they're the people who are out there going, don't worry about it, man, don't FOMO, you're okay. Like there's going to be other opportunities, then that's how they talk to themselves. We talked about the inner critic versus the inner coach. If somebody's coming out to you with some of this stuff, you got some inner critic things. This is also something when you're talking about how to when we talked about you are the 5 people you spend the most time with and how to use discernment to surround yourself with people who are healthy minded and going to help you achieve your goals, this is something you can do to help decipher whether or not these people are good for you and helping to decipher what other people's perceptions are and the realities they live in, because losers will talk like losers and winners will talk like winners. And if they aren't winners yet, they're going to be faking it till they make it. Wouldn't you rather be faking it till you make it into being a winner rather than faking it till you make it into being a loser? So the last thing I want to say is don't take things personally, because nothing anybody ever says or does is about you. It says more about themselves. So if you're going to choose what kind of a person you want to be, when you're reframing things for others, and we're using our peers as mirrors, or we're being the mirror for our peer. Somebody says like, oh, I suck at this. You know, it's like having the sportsmanship award. If you've ever been on a team sport, there's always somebody who's got to lift them up, and you recognize how important of a part of the team they are. There are even plays when you're down bad, like on here on a gala trade, this person was bombed, like they got stopped out. The trade didn't go their way right away, but then it wound up flipping and turning. And so this person was able to be like, hey, yeah, the trade idea is still, valid. It's better here. Maybe you can even a better entry than I did, right? Everything you say when it comes to reframing doesn't always have to be so emotionally charged, right? Last but not least, when you're giving yourself feedback or anybody else feedback, you may have been taught the hamburger technique or the sandwich technique, which is basically say something nice, slide in your critique here, and end it with something nice. I'm not teaching you to do this for others. I'm more so wanting you to do this for yourself. The reason people phrase things in this manner is to disarm people and reduce the possibility of an angry reaction. But you can do this and treat yourself like this in the same way. So you deliver a nice thing, you give the constructive criticism, letting people know that you're on their side, motivating them, ending with that. Some places and some workplaces have adopted and changed the hamburger critique or the sandwich critique into tacos and sushis. Taco is all good things, right? This is just nothing but good things pretty much. And the sushi is like the raw meat. Like, I'm just going to give you the fish. I'm not going to dress it up. It's not going to be a taco, raw yellowtail, right? And if you are going through and you're going to start analyzing your P&L, or if you're looking at your self-sabotage exercises, your self-discipline exercises, your structures, if you're looking at your wellness wheel and you're like, I'm not following this shit, you can give yourself a the kind of critique that is the most balanced, which is the hamburger. Try not to do and it be too soft on yourself or to be too hard on yourself. People who have had parents who are authoritarian tend to be too hard on themselves and focus on the majority of their failures. People who were raised by overly permissive parents tend to be too easy on themselves and give themselves, taco things. Well, at least you're learning how to trade. What we want to do is we want to strive for that balance. We want the hamburger technique when we give things. So your growth task now, we've got just 5 minutes left. What you should be able to do after I've given you some of these examples is going back to that list that you made for yourself of just a couple phrases of what you were thinking or feeling and try to reframe them. So if you said, I feel like a failure because I've lost a lot of money, how would you reframe that? Because we've given that same many examples here that you could do for that. Another task that you could do is you could revisit your P&L, which is something that everybody avoids doing, but is something that is it's raw data, it's truth, it's honest truth. It's not perspective equals reality shit. It's just the analytics. It's truth. You can't argue with it. So revisit that, give yourself some feedback, extract the good components from your trades. If you've been keeping a trading journal and going through some of your plays, I have a mentee who does this really, really, really well, thorough. He'll go through and he'll say his good things and he gives himself his critiques and he gives a good hamburger aspect to it. The reason he gives a good hamburger aspect is because most of his trades do have good components to them. And most of your trades should too. If you're using the longevity cake, you've got timing, direction, and risk management. There's almost certainly, let's say you picked the right direction, you longed when you should long. Maybe your entry was a little late, maybe you cut your runner a little short, but there's usually almost always going to be some good stuff there. This is also a good thing to check your perspective. If you think you have more sushi, like you've just got, like you think I just suck at trading. And if I look at my P&L, that's just going to reinforce for me that I suck at trading, that I'm making bad choices. Then you're incorrectly perceiving yourself in that deficit category, right? Maybe you've got more tacos than you realize. Maybe you did have one or two or a couple of really good ones. The majority of your trades should be burgers. There should be mixed components to them, good and bad. If you need help analyzing your trades, I would suggest that you get mentorship. You can reach out to Birkenstock and the server, or you can talk to Stefan or admin, any analysts on the team, and you can have somebody who's willing to go through that with you. Mostly a good mentor should be able to look at one or two of your trades or just listen to you, and they'll know what you need to work on. Sometimes even if you aren't able to see it for yourself. If you can't see things for yourself, getting a mentor is an absolute must because that's how you start to do the diagnosis. I hope that these lessons have helped you get through that point. I think they probably have, but if you're somebody who refuses to see yourself as you are, then the only way you can start to do that is by somebody else calling you out. I talked about JJ Redick earlier. JJ Redick was in his sophomore year of college at Duke. He played really well, but he was a really shitty team player. He was really poor, and they didn't win the championship that year. They made it to Final Four, but they didn't win. And he said that Coach K said to him, "It's because we didn't win a championship because you don't deserve to be a champion." And he said that oh, that was so hard, on my heart. Like he carried that with him forever, but he never had another coach, NBA or otherwise, be able to say to him that he wasn't working at the level that a championship should be able to work at. So he turned that failure into being his growth, right? He reframed that for himself as being the best advice I've ever received. And he views Coach K as the best coach that he's ever had. So in addition to academy mentorship within the servers, I always recommend books. Y'all know I'm a bookworm. 2 big books. The first one is The 4 Agreements. Anybody and everybody should read this book in their life. Stefan is commenting in the chat, the book is fire. Absolutely. If you read it cover to cover, if you listen to it, it only takes you 1 hour and 20 minutes. So if you're ever going to be able to donate your amount of time to something, 1 hour, 20 minutes should be nothing. The 4 Agreements is the book that will change your life. Get through the first segment of it. Actually, I like to listen to it. Audible is the way to go for that one. I highly suggest. And then change your thoughts, change your life. Change your life, add an extra ether. Change Your Life by Wayne Dyer. Another banger. Wayne Dyer is an awesome mindset coach. If what I'm talking about with you when you're shifting your perspective is really resonating with you, if you don't know where to go from this, if you're not a book reader and hate that I suggest books at the end for your growth tasks, I've suggested many people David Goggins in the background or in the former older lessons before. Don't know what word I was looking for there. David Goggins, Tony Robbins, but Wayne Dyer, Joe Dispenza are also going to be good resources for you if you're a listening person or a visual person. Change your thoughts, change your life. Remember, whether you think you can or you can't, you're right. Who said that? An illiterate farm boy who wound up inventing the car. Any questions before we head off for the lesson? Questions, comments, concerns? Julian says, back when I lost a lot, I embraced the pain to learn from my mistakes and tried to be realistic because the knowledge I gained probably was worth a lot more. Yeah, absolutely. We call that your initiation trading or paying your dues to Trading University. Stefan, thank you for the kind comments. Things to reflect on. Appreciate it. I'm happy I can do that. Remember, as you're going into your trading sessions or as you're going about your life, how am I choosing to look at things? Am I being my own worst enemy? Or am I my own best coach? Wish I had that 2 years ago. The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is today. We all wish we had done things 6 years ago. Bitcoin, for example, GME. Facts, my guy. Thanks for your precious time. Of course, I love to teach. It's my favorite thing, favorite way to contribute to the server. It's a good point that you can have this knowledge come into your life. Next thing is the how. How are we going to use it? Let's put it to use. It's application, right? Also, if you haven't picked your face for your invisible broker, I would put that in my notes. Your Coach K, your scariest looking dude ever, Bone Crusher. I ain't never scared. I'm gonna go ahead and stop recording real quick. Yeah, if you haven't picked who you think should be the face of your invisible broker, who's going to check your trades before you go ahead and implement them, you should definitely do that. That's another big takeaway from this. Mr. T. Maybe it's like I had a mentee tell me once when I talked to him about this, he said he made Amaranth his broker and he didn't want to disappoint her.